September 1943. A freight train rolls through the Pennsylvania countryside, carrying human cargo that has traveled 6,000 miles from the killing fields of North Africa. Inside the converted boxcars, 300 German prisoners of war press their faces against the wooden slats. Watching America pass by at 40 miles per hour, they see something impossible. Oberleutnant Hans Werner, 26 years old, veteran of Kasserine Pass and the Tunisian campaign, stands at the gap in the slat and cannot process what his eyes are telling him. He has spent 2 years being told by German high command that America is a nation on the brink of collapse, that its industrial capacity is overstated propaganda, that the Red Army bleeds the Reich. But the Americans, soft, undisciplined, dependent on Jewish-controlled finance and degenerate culture, pose no real material threat. The train passes a steel mill outside Pittsburgh. It stretches for 3 miles. 3 miles of blast furnaces, rolling mills, foundries, and rail yards. The smoke from the stacks darkens the afternoon sky. Werner counts the smokestacks. He stops at 40. Each one represents a furnace large enough to supply a German armored division for a year. And this is just one facility in one city he's never heard of. Mein Gott, someone whispers behind him. The voice belongs to Feldwebel Otto Kraus, a veteran of Rommel's 21st Panzer Division. Kraus fought at Gazala, El Alamein, and the Maret Line. He has seen German tank production firsthand at the factories in Kassel and Friedrichshafen. He knows what industrial capacity looks like. This is just one factory? Werner doesn't answer. He's watching the workers. Hundreds of them streaming out of the facility at shift change. They climb into automobiles, private automobiles, dozens of them, hundreds perhaps, and drive away toward homes Werner can see dotting the hillsides. Workers, factory workers, owning cars. The train continues west, through Ohio, through Indiana. The prisoners rotate at the slats, taking turns watching America reveal itself. They pass rail yards where hundreds of locomotives sit waiting for deployment. Freight trains 100 cars long hauling grain, coal, steel, timber. Farms with machinery that dwarfs anything in Bavaria or Prussia. Mechanical harvesters working fields that stretch to the horizon. Small towns with paved streets, electric lights, warehouses bursting with consumer goods, despite the war rationing they've been told is crippling the American economy. Near Chicago, they pass an aircraft factory. A corporal from Stuttgart, a toolmaker in civilian life, recognizes the building for what it is. He watches a B-17 bomber being rolled out of the facility. Then another, then another. 3 bombers in the 20 minutes their train sits at a switching yard. He does the mathematics in his head. 3 bombers per hour, call it 60 per day from this one factory. He knows, everyone in the Wehrmacht knows, that Germany's entire aircraft production runs about 1,500 planes per month across all types. If this one factory is producing bombers at this rate, and if there are other factories like it, he stops calculating. The numbers become obscene. Hauptmann Dietrich von Schell, captured at Salerno just 2 weeks earlier, has been mostly silent since boarding the train in New York Harbor. Von Schell is a career officer, son of a Prussian military family, educated at the Kriegsakademie. He understands logistics, industrial capacity, strategic depth. He has read Clausewitz and Moltke. He has studied the American Civil War and knows what industrial advantage meant when the Union strangled the Confederacy. Now, watching Ohio farmland roll past, he turns to the senior German officer in the car, Major Friedrich Gustmann of the Hermann Göring Panzer Division. "We've already lost," von Schell says quietly. "Haven't we?" Gustmann says nothing for a long moment. Then, yes. "We lost the day we declared war on them." This conversation happens in September 1943. The war will continue for another 20 months. Over 3 million more people will die. But in this boxcar, rolling through the American Midwest, a group of professional German soldiers realizes something their leadership either doesn't know or refuses to acknowledge. Germany is not fighting a war it can win. It is fighting a war it has already catastrophically lost. The only variable left is how much destruction will occur before the inevitable end. The psychological impact is immediate and total. Werner will later write in his diary, preserved after the war, that the moment marked the death of belief. Not belief in National Socialism necessarily, though for many prisoners that died too, but belief in victory, Belief that German tactical superiority, operational excellence, and fighting spirit could overcome the material imbalance. Because it's not an imbalance. It's a chasm so wide that no amount of courage or skill can bridge it. The train continues west toward the POW camp at Camp Concordia in Kansas. But the real journey, the psychological journey from confident warriors to defeated men who know the outcome before Berlin does, is already complete. It happened somewhere between Pittsburgh and Chicago, watching a nation that fights a global two-front war, while its civilian population drives private automobiles and its factories produce weapons at a scale that defies comprehension. Werner writes one sentence in his diary that night. Now I understand why Rommel wept. The men on that train didn't start as prisoners. They started as believers. Werner joined the Wehrmacht in 1939, 19 years old, son of a schoolteacher from Heidelberg. He believed what every young German of his generation was taught to believe, that Germany had been betrayed in 1918, strangled by the Versailles Treaty, humiliated by foreign powers, and now finally was reclaiming its rightful place. The victories came fast. Poland in weeks, France in 6 weeks. The Wehrmacht seemed invincible because it was invincible. Blitzkrieg wasn't propaganda. It was doctrine that worked. North Africa felt different from the start. Rommel's Africa Corps arrived in February 1941 to prop up failing Italian forces. The Desert War became a strange, almost gentlemanly affair, at least by Eastern Front standards. Vast distances, mobile warfare, no civilians to complicate things. Rommel earned respect even from his enemies. His troops believed they were fighting the clean war, while their comrades in Russia fought the dirty one. Werner arrived in Libya in early 1942, assigned to the 15th Panzer Division. He participated in the capture of Tobruk. 25,000 British and Commonwealth troops surrendered in a single day. Rommel received his field marshal's baton for that victory. It felt like vindication. The British Empire, the greatest colonial power on earth, was being systematically dismantled by German tactical superiority. Then came El Alamein. October 1942. Montgomery's 8th Army with material superiority that shocked the Germans who encountered it. Thousands of tanks, unlimited artillery shells, air supremacy so complete that Luftwaffe pilots stopped flying daylight missions. The Africa Corps fought with skill and desperation, but skill and desperation don't stop a steamroller. Rommel retreated. 2,000 miles across Libya and Tunisia, fighting delaying actions, watching his forces whittled down by attrition, supply shortages, and the realization that the British weren't beating them. American logistics were, because by late 1942, the Americans had arrived. Green troops, poorly led in their first engagements, humiliated at Kasserine Pass in February 1943. German veterans like Werner watched American infantry panic and run, watched American tanks blunder into killing zones, watched the vaunted sleeping giant that Hitler had awakened look clumsy and amateurish. But behind those clumsy infantry and amateur tank crews came something else. Supply convoys that never ended. Replacement equipment arriving faster than it could be destroyed. Casualty rates that would cripple a German division absorbed without operational pause. The Americans learned fast, terrifyingly fast for an army supposedly soft and undisciplined. Tunisia became a trap. Rommel flew back to Germany in March 1943, sick and defeated. The Africa Corps, what remained of it, held the Tunis bridgehead through April and into May. Werner's unit fought until they ran out of ammunition. Not low on ammunition. Out. Completely. No shells for the artillery. No fuel for the tanks. No bullets for the rifles. On May 13, 1943, 250,000 Axis soldiers surrendered, the largest mass surrender of German forces in the war to that point. Werner stood in a column of prisoners near Bizerta, watching American trucks arrive to transport them to collection points. The trucks were new. Every single one. Factory fresh. He counted them. Over 200 in just the convoy he could see. American soldiers handed out cigarettes, rations, water. The rations came in boxes labeled with production dates from 2 weeks earlier. Manufactured in America, shipped across the Atlantic, distributed to frontline troops within 14 days. His own unit had been on half rations for 3 months. The journey to America took 6 weeks. First to Casablanca, then by troop ship convoy across the Atlantic. The prisoners traveled in converted cargo holds, but even that proved revealing. The ship, The USS Wakefield, formerly the luxury liner Manhattan, was one of dozens in the convoy. Werner watched from the deck as the convoy assembled, 60 merchant ships, 10 destroyer escorts, 4 cruisers. The scale of it. The casual waste of resources on a single convoy run. Krauss, standing next to him at the rail, pointed at the destroyers. "We lost 3 U-boats last month trying to sink convoys like this. 3 boats, 200 men, for what? They'll have these ships replaced before the month ends." The prisoners arrived in New York Harbor on August 28, 1943. They stood on deck at dawn, watching the Statue of Liberty emerge from the morning haze. Manhattan's skyline rose behind it, buildings taller than anything in Berlin, stretching for miles along the waterfront. The prisoners counted the skyscrapers, stopped counting. The dockyards teemed with activity even at dawn. Cranes loading cargo, workers streaming toward shifts, warehouses stacked with materials waiting for deployment. Von Schell, the Prussian captain, studied it all with the eye of a professional officer trained in logistics. He turned to Gussman, the major. "This is just one city." "Yes? How many cities do they have like this?" "I don't know. 10, 20? And we declared war on this." Gussman didn't answer. There was no answer that made sense. From New York, the prisoners traveled by train to processing centers and then to permanent camps, scattered across the American interior. The train journey, the one that broke them psychologically, was never meant as propaganda. The Americans simply needed to move prisoners inland cheaply, and trains were the cheapest option. No one planned for the psychological impact of showing German POWs the industrial heartland. No one realized that the most effective weapon against German morale wasn't a bomb or a bullet. It was a window, a simple gap in a boxcar slat, 40 miles per hour, rolling through the nation that Germany had foolishly chosen as an enemy. Every mile of track, every factory, every farm, every warehouse told the same story. This war was over. It had been over before it began. Germany was fighting the richest, most industrialized, most resource-abundant nation on Earth while simultaneously fighting the Soviet Union, another continental power with nearly unlimited manpower. The strategic insanity of it became clear to these prisoners before it became clear to Berlin. And the worst part, they couldn't do anything about it. They could only watch and wait and hope that someone in Germany, someone with authority, someone with Hitler's ear, would look at the same numbers, the same impossible material gap, and make the rational choice. No such person existed. Camp Concordia, Kansas, September 1943. 4,000 German prisoners behind wire fences in the middle of American farmland that stretches flat and endless in every direction. The camp itself is new, constructed in 4 months using prefabricated materials, electric lighting, running water, barracks heated for the coming winter. Built faster than most German military installations Werner has seen in Europe. But the camp is not the revelation. The revelation comes in stages, each one hammering home the same impossible truth. Stage 1 happens during the medical processing. Every prisoner receives a physical examination by American military doctors. Standard procedure, checking for disease, malnutrition, wounds requiring treatment. Werner stands in line with 200 other men, waiting his turn. He notices something odd. The medical equipment, stethoscopes, blood pressure cuffs, thermometers, bandages, antiseptics, all new, not refurbished, not carefully conserved from peacetime stocks. New, manufactured during wartime, and distributed so abundantly that a POW, processing center in Kansas, receives equipment that German field hospitals would consider luxury items. The doctor examining Werner is a captain, maybe 30 years old, from someplace called Wisconsin. He checks Werner's teeth, eyes, reflexes, takes notes on a clipboard with a fountain pen he pulls from a pocket full of pens, 3 or 4 extras, like they cost nothing. In Germany, a fountain pen is something you inherit, repair when it breaks, use until it physically cannot function anymore. You're malnourished, the doctor says through an interpreter. We'll get you on a proper diet. You should gain back the weight in a few weeks. Werner wants to laugh. Malnourished, yes. The Africa Corps lived on captured British rations for the last 6 months because German supply ships couldn't get through. But this American doctor says it like it's a solvable problem, something fixed with paperwork and requisitions. Stage 2 comes with the food. The prisoners eat in a mess hall that serves meals 3 times daily. The first dinner, beef stew, bread, butter, coffee, canned peaches for dessert. The portions are larger than what Werner ate as a free man in Germany before the war. Several prisoners refuse to eat, convinced it's a trick, a psychological operation to soften them before interrogation. Krause, the Feldwebel from the Panzer Division, sits across from Werner and stares at his tray. "This is more meat than my family in Dusseldorf has seen in 6 months. They're trying to impress us," someone says. "Tomorrow it will be different. Tomorrow is the same. And the next day. And the next." After a week, the prisoners stop expecting the food to run out. It doesn't run out. It never runs out. The camp commandant, a colonel from Iowa named Harding, explains through interpreters that the meals meet Geneva Convention standards and U.S. Army regulations for prisoner rations. This is the baseline, the minimum. Not propaganda, not special treatment. This is what America considers adequate food for enemy prisoners. Werner does mathematics in his head. 4,000 prisoners at this one camp. 3 meals per day. Multiply by the number of camps. Dozens, perhaps hundreds across America. Now multiply by American troops overseas. Millions of them. All eating better than these prisoners eat. All supplied across oceans. The logistical complexity makes his head hurt. Stage 3 arrives with work assignments. The Geneva Convention allows prisoner labor for non-military purposes. The Americans need agricultural workers. Half the farm labor force has enlisted or moved to factory jobs. Prisoners volunteer for farm work because it means leaving the camp, breathing air without wire fences, doing something besides sitting idle. Werner gets assigned to a farm cooperative near Concordia. The farmer's name is John Peterson, mid-50s, Swedish immigrant background, 320 acres of wheat and corn. Peterson picks up 6 prisoners every morning in a truck. A Ford, 3 years old, runs perfectly. The drive to the farm takes 20 minutes through countryside that looks nothing like the war-torn landscapes of Europe. Everything is intact. Every bridge, every barn, every fence line. No shell craters, no burned villages, no refugees, no rubble. America is fighting the largest war in human history, and the war hasn't touched its soil except through the absence of young men. Peterson's farm reveals the agricultural miracle that underpins everything else. The machinery stuns Werner into silence. A combine harvester that does the work of 30 men with scythes. A tractor with enough horsepower to pull plows that turn 12 furrows simultaneously. Grain silos filled with surplus from last season because production exceeds even wartime demand. Peterson explains through simple English and hand gestures that his farm is average. Not special, not unusual. Average. Thousands of farms across Kansas produce at this level. "Your farm," Werner asks haltingly in broken English. "How many workers?" Peterson holds up fingers. "My 2 sons. They're exempt from draft for agricultural work and hired help during harvest. Maybe 8 people total for 300 acres. 8 people." Werner's family farm in Baden, 30 acres, required 12 people working dawn to dusk to maintain. And it produced a fraction of what Peterson's farm produces with machinery that Germany cannot manufacture in sufficient quantities even for military purposes, let alone civilian agriculture. During lunch break, Peterson's wife brings food to the fields. Sandwiches with actual meat, fresh bread, apples, milk in glass bottles. She drives out in a second car. The family owns 2 automobiles. 2. A farmer in Kansas, not wealthy, not privileged, owns 2 cars while the Reichsmarshal himself makes do with requisitioned vehicles. Krause sits next to Werner in the shade of the truck, eating his sandwich slowly, and says what they're all thinking. How do you fight this? How do you fight a nation where farmers own 2 cars and feed prisoners better than our soldiers eat? The answer is obvious and terrible. You don't. You can't. Stage 4 comes from the trains. The farm sits near a rail line and freight trains pass every few hours. Long trains, 80, 90, 100 cars, hauling raw materials east and manufactured goods west. The prisoners count them obsessively, the way drowning men count waves. 12 trains in a single day, each one longer than anything on German rails, each one carrying enough steel, coal, grain, or manufactured goods to supply a German division for weeks. One afternoon, a special train passes, flat cars carrying tanks. New Sherman tanks, factory fresh, olive drab paint gleaming, headed east toward embarkation ports. Werner counts them. 60 tanks on one train. 60. He knows German tank production numbers. Everyone in the Wehrmacht knows them because the numbers are a constant source of anxiety. Germany produces roughly 500 tanks per month, total across all models from all factories. Many of them already committed to replacing Eastern Front losses. This one train passing a farm in Kansas on a random Tuesday afternoon, carries enough tanks to equip an entire panzer battalion. And it's just one train. On one day, on one rail line? Von Schell, who has been keeping careful notes in a journal he hides from the guards, does calculations that night in the barracks. He estimates American steel production at 10 times German capacity, oil production at 50 times, agricultural output at 20 times, automotive production, military and civilian combined, at levels that make German industry look medieval by comparison. These numbers cannot be correct, someone argues. You must be mistaken. Von Schell shakes his head. I keep recalculating, hoping I'm wrong. But every observation confirms it. The trains, the factories we passed, the equipment, the food, the casual abundance of everything, it all points to the same conclusion, which is Germany is fighting an enemy that can lose equipment at 3 times the rate we destroy it and still increase production month over month. We are fighting an enemy that hasn't fully mobilized its economy because it doesn't need to. We are fighting an enemy that considers this. He gestures at the camp around them. The electric lights, the heated barracks, the well-fed prisoners, this is what they consider minimal expenditure on captured enemies. The silence in the barracks stretches long. Outside, a freight train whistle sounds in the distance. Another train, hauling another load of materials that will become weapons, vehicles, shells, bullets. The arithmetic of extinction, rolling past on steel rails at 40 miles per hour. Gustmann, the major, speaks into the silence. Does Berlin know? Von Schell closes his journal. Berlin knows the numbers, but knowing numbers and understanding what they mean are different things. You have to see this, he waves at the window at America beyond it, to understand what we're facing. And no one in Berlin has seen this, not yet, but they will. After the war, when the diplomats and generals tour the ruins of the Reich and then fly to Washington, when they see with their own eyes what German POWs saw in 1943, they will understand. Too late, of course. Understanding always comes too late. But in September 1943, in a POW camp in Kansas, a few hundred German soldiers understand ahead of schedule. It doesn't change the outcome. Nothing they do can change the outcome, but it changes them. They stop being soldiers waiting for victory and become witnesses to inevitable defeat, counting trains and marking time until the mathematics of industrial war reaches its foregone conclusion. November 1943. The work assignments expand. Camp Concordia sends labor detachments to lumber mills, food processing plants, railroad maintenance crews. The Geneva Convention prohibits using POWs for direct war production, but the American economy is so integrated, so interconnected, that nearly every civilian job supports the war effort indirectly. The prisoners become embedded in the machinery of American industry, and from inside the machine, they see how it actually works. Werner gets reassigned from farm labor to a lumber operation in eastern Kansas. The company supplies timber for construction, barracks, bridges, transport crates, 1,000 uses the military needs. 40 German prisoners work alongside 30 American civilians, men too old for the draft, or classified 4F for medical reasons, or in reserved occupations. The work is hard but not brutal. 8-hour shifts, safety equipment provided, injury rate monitored by inspectors who visit monthly. The lumber mill processes timber at a rate Werner initially thinks is exaggerated until he watches it happen day after day. Logs come in on trucks, an endless stream of trucks, each one loaded with massive pines from forests that seem inexhaustible. The mill runs 2 shifts, 16 hours daily, and produces enough finished lumber to build a small village every week. One mill in Kansas. Werner knows there are lumber operations like this throughout the country, the Pacific Northwest, the South, the Northeast, each one contributing to the vast river of materials flowing toward the war. The mill superintendent, a man named Carver, explains the system during a safety briefing. We're contracted through the War Production Board. They coordinate all strategic materials, timber, steel, rubber, everything. Our quota is 10,000 board feet per day. We hit that most days, exceed it some days. 10,000 board feet. Werner translates the units in his head. Enough lumber to frame 20 houses every day. From one medium-sized mill in a state most Germans couldn't locate on a map. But the lumber itself isn't what breaks Werner's remaining illusions. It's the waste. The mill discards sawdust by the truckload, burns scrap timber in piles 20 feet high, throws away boards with minor defects that German factories would carefully repair and reuse. America has so much of everything that waste becomes economically rational. It's cheaper to discard and replace than to repair. The casual abundance makes conservation pointless. Krauss ends up at a food processing plant in Salina, 40 miles from Concordia. The plant cans vegetables, corn, beans, tomatoes, for military rations. He writes letters to Werner describing what he sees, letters the censors read and approve because nothing Krauss writes qualifies as military intelligence. It's just the mundane reality of American food production. The plant processes 50 tons of vegetables daily. 50 tons! It operates 24 hours, 3 shifts, with mechanical efficiency that eliminates most human bottlenecks. The vegetables come from farms within a 100-mile radius. Trucked in, processed through steam-heated machinery, canned in containers manufactured on site. Labeled, boxed, and shipped to distribution centers. The entire operation from raw vegetable to finished military ration takes less than 24 hours. Krauss watches a line worker discard an entire batch of canned corn because the temperature curve during processing fell slightly outside specifications. 200 cans, perfectly edible, thrown away for quality control reasons. In Germany, those cans would feed a company for 2 days. Here they go into waste bins without a second thought. The abundance makes them careless, Krauss writes to Werner. They don't understand scarcity because they've never experienced it. This war won't teach them either. They'll win without ever knowing what it means to run out of food, fuel, ammunition, hope. Other prisoners scatter across Kansas, Colorado, Oklahoma. They work in grain elevators, railroad yards, coal mines, cattle ranches. Every job reveals the same truth from different angles. America isn't straining to fight this war. It's operating at three-quarterly capacity and still producing more than Germany. And Japan combined Von. Schell gets assigned to clerical work at the camp. Headquarters, he speaks English, well enough to help with administrative tasks. This gives him access to newspapers, magazines, radio broadcasts. He becomes the unofficial intelligence officer for the German prisoners, collecting information, analyzing it, briefing the senior officers on what he learns. In December 1943, he reports on American aircraft production, 48,000 planes manufactured in the first 11 months of the year. 48,000. Germany's entire Luftwaffe numbered roughly 4,000 aircraft at its peak strength. America is producing more planes in a single month than Germany fields in total. And these aren't training aircraft or obsolete models. They're B-17s, B-24s, P-51s, P-47s, combat aircraft that match or exceed German equivalents. It gets worse, von Schell tells the assembled officers. These production numbers are from 1943. American industry is still expanding. New factories coming online, existing facilities increasing output. Projections for 1944 suggest 70,000 aircraft, maybe 80,000. Gustman, the major, listens to these briefings with the expression of a man watching his country bleed from a wound that cannot be bandaged. What about Germany? Our production? The Luftwaffe produced approximately 25,000 aircraft this year, most of them replacements for losses. Our frontline strength is actually declining. The mathematics is murder. Germany loses planes faster than it can build them. America builds planes faster than Germany can destroy them. The equation has only one solution, and it involves the complete annihilation of the Luftwaffe as a fighting force. But aircraft production is abstract, numbers on paper. The prisoners need something tangible to understand what those numbers mean in practical terms. They get it in February 1944 when an American B-17 makes an emergency landing at an airfield near the camp. Mechanical problems, nothing serious, but the bomber sits on the tarmac for 3 days while parts are shipped in and installed. The prisoners working nearby get a close look at it. The B-17 is 6 months old. built in Seattle, flown to England, completed 15 combat missions over Germany, sustained minor battle damage twice, repaired, returned to service. The crew, 9 men, average age 22, treat it like a bus. Functional, reliable, replaceable if lost. They know if this plane goes down, another one will be ready within days. Probably with upgrades. Werner talks to the flight engineer, a kid from Ohio, through the fence. The engineer explains the maintenance schedule, the supply chain for parts, the replacement cycle for engines. We swap out engines every 200 flight hours, he says. Not because they're worn out, but because that's the preventive maintenance standard. We could probably run them longer, but why risk it? Engines are cheap. Engines are cheap. Werner tries to imagine a Luftwaffe mechanic hearing that sentence. German aircraft engines are precision manufactured, carefully maintained, repaired down to individual parts when damaged. The idea of discarding a functioning engine because it reached an arbitrary flight hour threshold would be considered criminal waste. But it's not waste if you produce engines faster than you can install them. Then it's just good logistics. The B-17 flies away after 3 days, and Werner watches it climb into the winter sky, headed back to England, back to the bomber streams that pound German cities day and night. He thinks about the kid from Ohio, 22 years old, treating a 4-engine bomber like a delivery truck. Thinks about German pilots flying Bf-109s with patched canopies and engines running on synthetic fuel that gums up the cylinders. Thinks about the mathematics of it all. Spring 1944 brings news of the air war's intensification. 1,000 bomber raids on Berlin, Hamburg, the Ruhr. American bombers by day, British by night, around-the-clock destruction of German industrial capacity. Von Schell tracks the reports, compiles the data, and presents it at the evening briefings that have become routine. They're destroying German production faster than we can rebuild, he says. And they're doing it while simultaneously increasing their own output. The gap isn't closing, it's widening. A young lieutenant, captured in Italy, still believes in final victory, still thinks German wonder weapons will turn the tide, challenges him. The Führer has plans, secret weapons. The V-2 rocket, von Schell cuts him off. I've done the mathematics on the V-2. Each rocket costs as much to produce as a fighter aircraft. Each rocket carries 1 ton of explosives to one target. A single B-17 carries 4 tons of explosives, can be used repeatedly, and America produces 10 B-17s in the time it takes Germany to build 1 V-2. The V-2 is an engineering marvel that makes no strategic sense. The lieutenant has no answer. No one does. By summer 1944, the prisoners at Concordia number over 5,000. New arrivals come from Italy, from France after D-Day, from the collapsing fronts. Each group brings the same story. Overwhelming American material superiority, endless supplies, tactical doctrine that values equipment over lives because equipment is replaceable, and America has equipment to spare. A Panzer crewman captured in Normandy describes facing Sherman tanks in 5-to-1 ratios. We knocked out 3, 4, 5 Shermans for every one of our Panthers. Didn't matter. They kept coming. Lost a Panther and you're done. No replacements, no spare parts, no recovery vehicles to salvage it. They lose 5 Shermans, and 10 more arrive the next day. Fresh from the factory? How do you fight that? You don't. The answer is always the same. You don't fight it. You die against it, slowly or quickly, but the outcome never changes. Werner works through the summer and fall at the lumber mill, watching America prepare for victory with the casual confidence of a nation that has never doubted the outcome. The workers talk about what they'll do after the war, which colleges they'll attend on the GI Bill, which cars they'll buy, which houses they'll build, planning futures in a country that will emerge from the war richer and stronger than when it entered. Germany will emerge, if it emerges, as rubble and ash. Werner knows this now with absolute certainty. He knew it intellectually on that train in September 1943. But working inside the American industrial machine for a year has transformed intellectual knowledge into visceral understanding. He has seen the beast from inside, felt it breathing, watched it consume raw materials and exhale finished weapons. And he knows that nothing Germany possesses can stop it. The only question left is how long the dying will take. By late 1944, the initial shock of capture had long worn off for most German POWs in America. What replaced it was something far deeper and harder to describe, a slow unraveling of certainty. the same men who had once marched through Paris, who had believed in Hitler's invincible war machine, now found themselves writing cautious letters home, each one betraying a growing awareness that the war was already lost. At first, they didn't dare say it openly. Every message was censored, every envelope stamped G-proofed, checked by U.S. officials. But the subtext was unmistakable. POWs began to write about the size of the farms, the number of trucks, or the good condition of the railways. Some mentioned the generosity of the people, or the endless food. These were not compliments. They were quiet admissions of defeat, wrapped in coded language. In secret, German officers and intelligence-trained POWs were still sending detailed reports to Berlin through the Red Cross and neutral channels in Switzerland. They described what they had seen with military precision: rail lines that never stopped running, machine shops that never stopped humming, and cities that seemed to be built entirely around production. One report, later discovered in German archives, summarized it bluntly. The United States possesses an industrial potential so vast that victory against it is inconceivable. For many of the captured soldiers, this realization was a kind of spiritual disintegration. Their entire belief system, rooted in German efficiency, in the technical superiority of the Wehrmacht, in the myth of the master race, collapsed under the weight of America's practical abundance. They had seen boys in overalls, not soldiers, assembling tanks faster than Germany could repair them. They had seen women working 10-hour shifts at machine presses, yet smiling as they bought chocolate with ration stamps. The sheer normality of American life, even in wartime, mocked everything the Nazi propaganda had told them. Inside the camps, the mood shifted. The songs of camaraderie turned quieter. Officers found it harder to maintain discipline. Faith in final victory, once a slogan shouted in unison, became a whisper, then a joke. Some POWs began forming discussion circles, reading newspapers, or debating whether Germany could ever recover. In Camp Swift, Texas, a group of Afrika Korps veterans started a handwritten magazine called Der Ruf, which evolved from patriotic essays into quiet reflections about guilt, truth, and the meaning of loyalty. Psychologists, later studying the German POW system, called this phenomenon the collapse of the ideological spine. It wasn't just that the men had lost a war, they had lost the story that had made them feel noble for fighting it. Some coped by idealizing home, others by withdrawing completely. But a surprising number experienced a moral awakening. They began to see that the very efficiency and obedience they had once admired in themselves had been weaponized by a regime that led them into destruction. By 1945, even the German officers receiving coded intelligence back in Berlin knew the scale of American output. Albert Speer, Minister of Armaments, later testified that he realized by 1943, long before the Allied invasion of Normandy, that Germany's defeat was mathematically inevitable. But Hitler refused to believe it. The reports from the POW camps detailing the vastness of U.S. production were buried or dismissed. Ideology had replaced reason. Meanwhile, in the barracks of Kansas and Colorado, captured men huddled around radios, listening to news from Europe. They heard of the bombing of Hamburg, the encirclement at Stalingrad, the retreat from Italy. One POW later recalled, each headline was like another brick falling from the wall we had built around ourselves. The collapse was not dramatic, it was quiet, psychological, and absolute. Some men began volunteering for farm work or asking to stay in America after the war. They had seen a society built not on conquest, but on cooperation, and it stirred something unfamiliar, envy mixed with humility. Others, however, could not reconcile what they had witnessed. For them, the war ended not with surrender, but with a personal crisis. They returned to Germany to find ruins, hunger, and silence. And in that silence, many admitted that the moment they first knew it was over wasn't on the battlefield, but on an American train, watching endless factories roll by. When historians later interviewed these former POWs, one phrase appeared again and again. We had already lost before we knew it. That was the truth the leadership in Berlin could never face, the truth their own men had seen with their eyes and carried home in their hearts. By the time Germany officially surrendered in May 1945, most of its soldiers had surrendered inwardly long before. the day they saw the scale of America's power. They realized the war was not just unwinnable, it had always been unwinnable. And in that realization, an empire built on illusion began to dissolve, one captured mind at a time.